My name is Blanche Hedgepeth, and at 67, I still remember the smell of morning dew in the fields of my ranch. Blue heather is what my late husband Ebner called it 38 years ago when we first purchased the land on the outskirts of Broomfield. Back then, it was a rundown place with a dilapidated house and weedy pastures. The town of Broomfield wasn't much of a town in those days either, a dreary place in the middle of a dusty plain where everyone knew each other so well that they could predict what their neighbor would be thinking tomorrow. Mornings on the ranch always start the same way. I get up at first light, make time tea, a habit left by my grandmother, and go out on the terrace. The wooden railing, polished by time to a shine, pleasantly cools my palms. The fields stretch to the horizon in front of the house, and to the left are the stables and cattle pens. Ebner and I used to raise horses. It was his passion. After he died, I downsized, but I couldn't give it up completely. Probably because every time I run my hand over the velvet muzzle of a horse, it's like I can feel my husband's presence near me. Blue Heather Ranch is now valued at $3,700,000, an unthinkable sum for the poor girl I once was. Ebner and I started small, but over the years, we've turned this place into a true gem of the county. My life here has never been easy, working from dawn to dusk, battling crop failures, winds that blow off roofs, and banks that threaten to take land. But each trial made me stronger, taught me to rely only on myself. Maybe that's why I've never been able to understand my only daughter. Paris was born when Ebner and I were already on our feet. She never knew real need, never saw her mother darn the same jeans for the third time because there was no money for new ones. Her childhood was filled with everything one could want: the best schools, riding lessons, fancy clothes. I wanted her to appreciate what she had, to understand the value of labor and land. But it didn't work out that way. Paris grew up feeling like the world owed her something. Beautiful, with red hair like Ebner's and my green eyes, she was used to getting everything she wanted. As a teenager, the problems started: skipping school, secret parties, petty thefts of money from my wallet. Mom, you just don't understand. This is Broomfield. There's nothing going on here. I'm suffocating in this hole, was her constant phrase that I heard countless times. After high school, Paris left to attend university on the East Coast. I paid her tuition, hoping her education would give her a purpose in life. She didn't call much, and she didn't visit much. Each visit turned into a series of recriminations. The house was too old, the town too boring, my clothes too plain. One day she bluntly declared that she was ashamed to show pictures of the ranch to her university friends. "They think I live in some country estate, not this run-down place with cows," she said, wrinkling her nose. I remained silent then. What's the use of explaining to a man the value of something he's never built with his own hands? After university, Paris moved to the big city and got a job at a fashion magazine. She called once a month, usually when she ran out of money. I helped, even though I knew the money would be spent on designer shoes or another party. Each time she promised that she would soon get back on her feet, find a better job, pay off her debts. The promises remained promises. 2 years ago, in mid-fall, she called with unexpected news. She was getting married. His name was Winthrop Quinsley, and he worked for an investment firm. From Paris's enthusiastic accounts, he was from a wealthy family, had high society connections, and was about to have a dizzying career. "You're going to be amazed, Mom. He's so sophisticated, so educated. You must meet him," she chirped into the receiver. A week later, they arrived at the ranch. Winthrop was a tall, thin man with perfectly styled dark hair and thin, almost feminine hands. He was courteous, calling me Mrs. Hedgepeth, and constantly adjusting his tie, as if he was afraid the country air would spoil his impeccable appearance. They stopped at the guest house. Over dinner, Winthrop asked me enthusiastically about the ranch, how many acres of land there were, what the infrastructure was like, how the farm was organized. His interest seemed too professional for someone visiting for the first time. Have you ever thought about selling this place? He asked casually, spreading butter on the bread. Plots of land like this are very valuable right now, especially for the tourist business. I replied that the ranch wasn't just land, but my life's work. Winthrop smiled and nodded, but something cold and calculating flashed in his eyes. In that moment, I realized that this man saw only numbers in my house. Later, as Paris helped me with the dishes, I cautiously inquired how well she knew her fiancé. Geez, Mom, don't get me started, she burst out. I'm 32 years old. I can figure people out on my own. Winthrop loves me, not your money, if that's what you mean. I didn't argue. Years had taught me that some lessons people should learn through experience. Besides, maybe I was wrong in my suspicions. The wedding took place in the winter in the town where Paris lived. The ceremony was lavish, with 100 guests, most of whom I was seeing for the first time. Winthrop's friends were faceless men in expensive suits with equally condescending smiles. I felt out of place in my navy blue dress among these people, talking about yachts, stocks, and country clubs. After the gala, Paris barely found a minute to talk to me. Thanks for coming, Mom, she said, kissing me on the cheek. Winthrop thinks you should consider moving to town. Still, ranching is too much work for a woman your age. I smiled and replied that I was doing fine for now. In fact, the thought of leaving the ranch hadn't even crossed my mind. It was my home, my fortress, a place where every rock and every tree held the history of our family. After the wedding, Paris and Winthrop went on an extended wedding trip, then settled into a swanky downtown apartment. Paris stopped working. Winthrop thought his wife should be busy with the house and herself. They rarely called, even less often came. Each visit began with criticism of my lifestyle and ended with hints that I should think about the future and provide Paris with stability. One day, Winthrop bluntly asked me if a will had been drawn up and who would get the ranch in the event of my death. It was so tactless that even Paris was embarrassed. Honey, Mom's too young to be thinking about such things, she said, chuckling nervously. But I could already see them glancing at each other. There was impatience in their gazes, as if they were waiting to get their hands on the land. I realized I had to be more careful. About 6 months ago, Paris suddenly started calling more often. Her voice sounded unusually affectionate, inquiring about my health, asking if I needed help with chores. Then, as if by the way, she told me that she and Winthrop were thinking of buying a house in the country. You know, Mom, I miss nature so much. The smell of the grass, the silence. Maybe you could show Winthrop how to run a ranch. He's very interested, she said in a honeyed voice. I agreed to their visit even though I was well aware that Paris's sudden nostalgia for rural life was just an excuse. They were here for the weekend, and Winthrop, dressed in a ridiculous-looking cowboy outfit, feigned interest in the farm. He asked questions about land deeds, about bills, about the cost of maintaining the ranch. In the evening, when Paris had gone to take her bath, he came over to me on the terrace. Blanche, he called me by name for the first time. I want to be frank with you. Paris is worried about you. You're all alone here. The ranch needs constant attention. Paris and I could help. For example, if you would retitle some of the property to her, we could take care of some of the chores. I looked carefully into his cold gray eyes and said I'd think about his offer. He smiled and patted my hand like I was a child who had finally agreed to give up his toy. After they left, I couldn't sleep for a long time. It was clear they wanted the ranch, not to continue the business, but to sell it and make money. To them, it was just an asset that could be converted into cash. The thought of the land that Ebner and I had farmed for decades being turned into just another resort for rich slackers was unbearable. The next day, I called Hamish Thatcher, our family lawyer and an old friend of Ebner's. We made an appointment, and I realized I had to be proactive. If Winthrop and Paris were up to something against me, they didn't know who they were dealing with yet. I'd lived long enough to know how to recognize wolves in sheep's clothing, and I wasn't about to let them destroy what Ebner and I had spent a lifetime building. After Paris and Winthrop married, our relationship changed almost instantly. Where my daughter used to call me at least once a month, now I might not hear from her for months. The infrequent calls turned into formalities, empty conversations about the weather, new purchases, and social events. It was as if Paris were reading a pre-prepared text, avoiding any personal topics. The spring after their wedding was early and rainy. The creeks crossing the ranch had overflowed their banks, flooding the lower pasture. I spent nearly a week reinforcing levees and moving cattle to higher ground. One evening, soaked and tired, I returned home and found a message from Paris on my answering machine. Mom, Winthrop and I are having a reception this weekend. Many of the guests are important business associates of Winthrop. It would be great if you could come. Call if you can. Her voice sounded unnatural, like she was voicing a commercial. Despite my fatigue, I called back. Winthrop answered the phone. Ah, Blanche, it's wonderful that you called back. Paris is so looking forward to your coming. You know, among the guests will be a couple of people interested in real estate in your neighborhood. You might be interested in talking. I felt the muscles in my neck tense. Every conversation I'd had with him had, in one way or another, centered around the subject of the ranch and its potential sale. When I told him I couldn't leave the farm because of the flooding, there was an ill-concealed irritation in his voice. That's too bad. Paris will be disappointed. By the way, these flood problems are another argument for you to consider selling. Maintaining a farm like this is too burdensome for a woman of your age. I wanted to say that at 67, I could still run a ranch better than he could run his tie. But I held back and just said I'd call Paris back later. When we finally spoke, her voice sounded detached, like her thoughts were far away. Of course, Mom. I understand. Flooding is a big deal. Maybe next time. After that conversation, it was almost 2 months before I heard her voice again. This time the call was more personal. Paris informed me that she and Winthrop were going to come to the ranch for a few days. Winthrop is so tired of the hustle and bustle of the city. He says he's dreaming of a few days in nature, she said with an enthusiasm that struck me as playful. They arrived Friday night in a new SUV. Paris looked drained, with shadows under her eyes that she tried to hide with a layer of makeup. Winthrop, on the other hand, was beaming with energy. He hugged me with exaggerated cordiality and immediately began praising the scenery around the ranch. It's simply marvelous. You know, Blanche, places like this are in big demand right now. Ecotourism, country residences, it's all incredibly popular with the wealthy. Over dinner, he continued to talk about the potential of undervalued rural real estate, avoiding explicitly naming the ranch. Paris remained silent, picking at her plate and occasionally smiling strainedly. Later, when Winthrop went to take a shower, I tried to talk to my daughter alone. You look tired, sweetie. Is everything okay? Paris flinched, as if I'd caught her off guard. Everything's fine, Mom. Just a lot of social events lately. You know, the wife of a man in Winthrop's position has to conform. And how's your job at the magazine? She averted her gaze. I quit a few months ago. Winthrop thinks I'm better off concentrating on the house and his career. Something in her voice told me this decision hadn't come easily to her. Paris had always prided herself on her independence, despite the constant request for financial assistance. Are you sure this is what you want? Her eyes glittered with familiar irritation. Geez, Mom, Don't get me started. Winthrop takes care of me. We're doing fine. Not everyone needs a job to feel fulfilled. The next morning, Winthrop expressed a desire to tour the entire ranch. He wore a ridiculous cowboy hat and boots that had clearly only seen a store shelf. We set out on a tour of the property. Winthrop photographed everything: barns, fields, creeks, even the old fence on the north property. Documentary photography for the family archive, he explained with a smile when I gave him a questioning look. After lunch, Winthrop suggested we discuss a few business matters. We sat down in the living room and he pulled out a leather folder of papers. Blanche, I've been consulting with some real estate experts. Your ranch is located in a potentially very profitable area. With the right development approach, this land could bring in several times what it is now. I looked at him quietly, waiting for him to continue. He coughed and continued. I've prepared some documents. This is just a preliminary letter of intent. If you would redeed the ranch to Paris and me, we could attract investors and turn this place into a real gem. He held out the papers to me. I took them, but didn't read them. What will happen to the horses? With the ranch workers? Winthrop waved his hand. Oh, that can all be worked out later. Perhaps part of the area will remain a farm. For entourage, you know. Tourists like authenticity. I folded the papers neatly and handed them back to him. I need time to think it over. Decisions like this don't happen overnight. His smile faded slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. Of course, Blanche. There's no rush. Just keep in mind that the real estate market is booming right now. The sooner we get started, the more we can raise. That evening, as Paris and Winthrop watched a movie in the living room, I noticed the door to my office was ajar. I always closed it when I left. Everything inside looked untouched, but my gut told me someone had been here. The desk drawer where I kept my ranch papers was closed, but the lock seemed a little dislodged. I checked the contents, all the papers were there, but the order of the folders had definitely changed. For the next 2 days, Winthrop was emphatically polite and never spoke of selling again. I did, however, catch him talking on the phone a few times away from the house. The scraps of phrases I overheard included references to a promising property and a difficult but solvable situation with the current owner. On the day they left while helping Paris pack, I tried to talk to her again. Honey, you know I'm always on your side. If you need anything, just tell me. She froze for a moment, and I thought a shadow of the old Paris flashed in her eyes, vulnerable and looking for support. But the moment passed, and she put her mask of indifference back on. Everything's fine, Mom. I have everything I need. After they left, I carefully checked all the papers in the office. Nothing was missing, but I had no doubt that Winthrop had examined their contents. I was especially concerned that among the papers was the power of attorney for the administration of the estate that I had once executed for Paris in case I became ill or incapacitated. Paris and Winthrop didn't show up at the ranch for the next few months, but the calls became more regular. Winthrop often inquired about my health, advised me to take it easy, and offered to help with the management of the farm. Each conversation ended with a discreet reminder that they were always willing to take care of the ranch. In early fall, I received a letter from the bank notifying me of an attempt to obtain my account information. The request was made by proxy, but the bank required my personal confirmation. That was the final straw. I called Hamish Thatcher, our family lawyer since the Ebner days. Hamish was 5 years older than me, but still practicing. We met in his office, a small book-lined room in downtown Broomfield. He listened to my story without interrupting, only occasionally making notes in his notebook. So, you think your son-in-law is trying to gain control of the ranch? He asked when I finished. I'm sure he is. The only question is how far he's willing to go. Hamish took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly. Blanche, first of all, we need to revoke that old power of attorney for Paris. It gives too much scope for abuse. Also, I'd recommend an audit of all the deeds to the ranch and see if there have been any unauthorized attempts to change ownership. He was silent for a moment, as if weighing whether to speak further. One more thing, Blanche. I know you don't want to hear this, but you might want to consider talking to Paris directly, without her husband present. She may not fully understand what's going on. I shook my head. You haven't seen her, Hamish. She's completely under his influence. Any criticism of Winthrop causes her nothing but rejection. Hamish nodded. Then we'll have to proceed without her input. First, let's review all the legal documents and make sure your rights are secure. We spent a few hours going over the paperwork and making a plan of action. I revoked the old power of attorney and executed a new, more limited one for Hamish himself. We also prepared letters to the bank and the IRS, forbidding them from providing any information about my affairs without my personal presence. When I returned to the ranch, it was already dark. The house greeted me with its usual silence, but for the first time in a long time, that silence seemed unsettling. I turned on all the lights, checked the locks on the doors and windows. A strange feeling of insecurity never left me. I looked at the walls that held our family history, the pictures of Ebner, the things we had collected together, and thought about the fact that my own son-in-law and daughter might be planning to rob me of it all. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. I lay staring at the ceiling and thought about how strangely life works. I had always thought that the most valuable legacy I could leave Paris was not money or land, but the ability to stand on one's own 2 feet, to appreciate what one had, and to respect the labor that went into creating something worthwhile. But the only thing she seemed to be interested in was the material side of the inheritance. I made a decision this morning. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for Winthrop to figure out how to take over my ranch. If he wanted a war, he'd have one, but we'd fight it by my rules. I called Hamish again and made another appointment. I had a plan that would put an end to my son-in-law's ambitions once and for all. After the meeting with Hamish, it was as if I was revitalized. I had a purpose, a plan of action, and the feeling of helplessness receded. For the next few weeks, I went about my normal business on the ranch, but I was always on the lookout. Every call, every letter, I regarded with suspicion. Hamish contacted me periodically, updating me on the progress of our legal preparations. We had changed the ranch's ownership structure, creating a system of protection that would go off at the right moment. In late October, the first frost hit. The ground was covered in silvery frost in the mornings, and my breath turned into clouds of vapor. I was just finishing getting the stalls ready for winter when Paris called. Mom, Winthrop and I are coming over this weekend. We need to have a serious talk. Her voice sounded tense, but determined. I felt everything inside clench. The moment I'd been waiting for and dreading at the same time was coming. Of course, darling. I'll be waiting. They arrived Friday night. Winthrop seemed agitated and impatient, his usual impeccability slightly shaken. His shirt collar was carelessly undone. His tie was missing. Paris looked pale but determined, like a man who had been preparing for an unpleasant conversation for a long time. At dinner, they hardly spoke at all. Winthrop glanced at his watch, and Paris barely touched her food. Finally, when I brought dessert, Winthrop cleared his throat. Blanche, we need to discuss the future of the ranch. I nodded quietly, waiting for him to continue. Paris and I have been thinking about this for a long time, and we've come to the conclusion that it's becoming increasingly difficult for you to manage such a large farm. We want to help. And how are you going to help? I asked, sipping my tea. Winthrop glanced over to Paris, and she spoke up, gaining some air. Mom, we want you to move to the city. We found a lovely apartment near us. You can rest and take care of yourself, and we'll take care of the ranch. I set my cup down slowly. And what will happen to the ranch? Winthrop couldn't stand it and intervened. Look, Blanche, let's be blunt. This place is a gold mine that's sitting idle. We can turn it into a luxury resort, attract investors. In 5 years, the value could increase several times over. And for that, you need me to sign the title transfer papers? Exactly. Winthrop became animated. I've already prepared all the papers. It will be a mere formality. You'll remain the honorary owner. You'll get a share of the profits, but we'll take over all the operational work. I looked at Paris. She avoided my gaze. And you're okay with that plan? She finally looked up. Mom, it's the best way out for everyone. You'll be able to rest. The ranch will get a new lease on life, and we can finally put some of our plans into action. I realized Winthrop had already promised her something, perhaps her dream house, or the trip she'd always talked about. He was skillfully using her desires to force her to act against me. I need to think about it, I said. This is a big decision. I can't make it right now. Winthrop barely contained his irritation. Of course you will, Blanche. But don't drag it out. Potential investors are expecting my answer by the end of the week. The rest of the evening passed in tense silence. I said I was tired and retired to my room early. Through the wall, I could hear Paris and Winthrop's muffled conversation. It sounded like they were arguing. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was irritated, especially on Winthrop's part. In the morning, they both looked wrinkled, as if they hadn't slept well. At breakfast, I told them I had to go into town on business and suggested they make themselves at home. Winthrop instantly perked up. That's a great idea. Paris and I will take some measurements for the planners. Purely preliminary, of course. I nodded and left. Instead of town, I headed to a small roadside diner about 20 miles from the ranch. Hamish was waiting for me there. He looked worried. There's news, Blanche, and it's not good news. I've made inquiries about your son-in-law's financial situation. He's in serious debt. Gambling, failed investments. He's in desperate need of money. I nodded. That explained his impatience and persistence. Anything else? Hamish wrinkled his nose. There's something strange. There's an entry in the real estate registry about a tentative agreement to sell the ranch. It's like you've already agreed to sell it to some corporation called Havenly Retreat. I checked that company is connected to the people your son-in-law does business with. My heart skipped a beat. But I didn't sign anything. I know, that's why we've filed for falsification of documents. But the process can take time, and while the record exists, there could be legal complications. We discussed next steps, and I returned to the ranch. The house greeted me with unusual silence. Winthrop and Paris's car was gone. There was a note on the kitchen table. We're away on business. We'll be back tomorrow. I headed straight for the study. The door was unlocked, though I distinctly remembered locking it before I left. Everything inside looked untouched, but I could sense someone had been here. I checked the safe behind the painting. It was locked, but I thought the code lock had been touched recently. Inside were duplicate copies of the ranch documents I'd put there as bait, changing some of the details. The originals were kept in a safe place known only to Hamish and me. But if Winthrop used those duplicates, I was breathless at the sudden realization. I quickly dialed Hamish's number. Please check to see if the ranch purchase agreement has been registered. Not a tentative agreement, but a full-fledged contract. Hamish called back an hour later, and his voice sounded worried. Blanche, it's happened. There's an entry in the registry for the sale of the ranch to Havenly Retreat for $3,700,000. The deed is signed in your name and notarized by a notary in a neighboring county. We can dispute it, but we need to act fast. I felt strangely calm. So Winthrop had decided to commit forgery after all. He'd probably used Paris's old power of attorney and a forged signature. Well, now I had proof of his fraud. Thank you, Hamish. Keep monitoring the situation and be prepared to file a fraud report. Neither Winthrop nor Paris returned the next day, nor did they arrive a day later. I called Paris's cell phone, but it was turned off. It wasn't until the fourth day that I got a message on my answering machine telling me that she and Winthrop had gone on a cruise and she would contact me when she got back. I contacted Hamish, and we began the legal process of challenging the deal. But it was more complicated than we'd anticipated. The signature on the deed was a perfect imitation of mine. The notary swore he saw me sign the documents, and the most unpleasant thing was that the money had already been deposited into the account specified in the contract and was immediately withdrawn. It's been 2 weeks. I lived like on pins and needles, expecting that at any moment new owners could appear on the ranch. Hamish was doing everything he could to slow down the process of ownership transfer, but without direct evidence of fraud, it was not easy. Then one night, the phone rang. The number was an unfamiliar international number. Hello? I tried to keep my voice calm. Blanche? It's Winthrop. I hope you're not too bored at not your ranch anymore. His voice was slightly slurred due to the poor connection, but smugness shone through the interference. Winthrop, what a surprise. How was the cruise? He chuckled. Excellent. The Caribbean is beautiful this time of year. Too bad you won't be able to appreciate it with your finances now. Where's Paris? I asked, ignoring his teasing. Oh, she's enjoying a spa treatment. You know, she was really worried about the whole thing, but I explained to her that you're too old to run a household like that. It was a merciful decision. I remained silent, letting him continue. He was clearly calling to gloat, and I wanted to hear how far he would go. You know, he continued, I was planning on leaving you a small compensation at first. You are Paris's mother after all. But then I thought, why? You always looked down on me, thought I was unworthy of your precious daughter. So consider this a lesson. Interesting approach, I said calmly. So now what? Are you and Paris planning on coming back after the cruise? He laughed again. To that backwater Broomfield? No way. We're starting a new life, Blanche. Europe, Asia, the whole world is before us, and you'll have to get used to a life of, let's just say a little more modest. I heard a noise in the background, and Winthrop was distracted for a second. Then his voice came back into the tube, but now with a note of irritation. I have to go now, but I wanted to break the news to you personally. It's all settled, Blanche. The papers have been signed. The money has been received. Tomorrow, representatives of the new owners will come to the ranch. You'll have 48 hours to pack up and vacate the house. I took a deep breath. One last thing, Blanche. His voice became hard. Now disappear from my life, you miserable old woman. I couldn't stand it and laughed. I couldn't help it. My laughter must have puzzled him because he was silent for a second. What's so funny? He finally asked. Oh, Winthrop, I said, still laughing. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. You're the one who has no idea. Your ranch is sold. I've got the money. It's all over. Sold? I asked again. And to whom? To the Havenly Retreat Company. It's official. It's legal. I was smiling into the phone now, knowing he couldn't see it, but could probably hear it in my voice. Winthrop, I knew you'd try something like this. Knew it from the beginning. Why do you think I left those documents in such an accessible place? There was silence in the receiver. What do you mean? He finally asked, and I could hear the first notes of alarm in his voice. I mean that the deeds you stole are forgeries. The real property deeds are somewhere else entirely. And the Havenly Retreat Company is actually owned by an old friend of mine. He and I devised this plan as soon as I suspected you were up to something. You're lying. His voice trailed off into a shout. Check it out, I replied calmly. Call your partners. Find out who the real owner of the company you supposedly sold my ranch to is. I heard him breathing heavily into the receiver. A string of swear words followed. That's impossible. I checked everything. The papers were real. They were, Winthrop. Before I replaced them, I knew you wouldn't resist temptation, and you lived up to my expectations. And now what? His voice sounded confused. Now? I held out a pause. Now the money you received will be returned to me. And you're going to have to explain to Paris why you were suddenly left without funds in the middle of the cruise. And, by the way, I have all the evidence of your fraud. Forging documents, signing in my name. Those are serious offenses, Winthrop. You're bluffing. But the confidence in his voice was gone. If that's what you think, go back to Broomfield. See what the local sheriff and the federal prosecutor's office have to say. There was a noise in the receiver again, and I heard Paris's voice asking who he was talking to. Winthrop quickly told her it was a business call, and she stepped away. Blanche, listen. His voice became ingratiating. Let's resolve this amicably. I can see that I underestimated you. We could make a deal. We could, Winthrop, if you hadn't called me a pathetic old lady and tried to leave me homeless. But now I'll just watch your scam fall apart. You'll regret it, he hissed. I'll find a way to get at you and your precious ranch. You try that, I replied calmly. Just keep in mind that your every move is now being tracked. One wrong move and you'll be behind bars. I heard him exhale sharply, and then the connection went dead. He hung up the phone. I slowly put the phone down and walked to the window. Beyond the glass were the fields of the ranch, stretching to the horizon. This land, these trees, this house, it was all still mine. I had protected the legacy that Ebner and I had spent decades building. But I knew the fight wasn't over. Winthrop isn't the kind of man who admits defeat easily. He'd probably try to do something about it. And Paris, what will happen to her when she learns the truth? Will she finally make her own way or stay in the shadow of her con man husband? I didn't know the answers to those questions. All I knew was that I was ready for the next round. After all, I hadn't just survived in this harsh land. I'd learned how to win. It all started about 3 months before Winthrop's call. On an early September morning, I discovered that the lock on my desk drawer was slightly warped, barely noticeable. But to someone who had opened it every day for 30 years, the change was obvious. Inside were ranch documents, tax returns, insurance policies, all in perfect order, neatly organized into folders. At first glance, nothing was missing, but my gut told me that someone had been rummaging around, trying very hard not to leave a trace. I remembered Paris and Winthrop's last visit. My daughter had spent most of the day in town, supposedly meeting old friends, and Winthrop had stayed at the ranch, claiming he wanted to work in silence. He had the perfect opportunity to review my paperwork. The next day, I called Hamish Thatcher. He wasn't just our family's lawyer. He'd been Ebner's friend since his teenage years, a man we trusted unconditionally. Hamish, I need your help, but this must remain strictly between us, I said when we met in his office. He listened carefully to my suspicions without interrupting. When I finished, he took off his glasses and wiped them thoughtfully with his handkerchief. So you think your son-in-law wants to get his hands on the ranch in some way? And you have reason to believe he's already examined your papers without authorization? I nodded. I'm pretty sure of it. Plus his constant hints that I should turn over management of the ranch to him and Paris. The last time, he even offered to retitle the property for my own convenience. Hamish took a deep breath. Blanche, let's look at the possible scenarios. The simplest and most legitimate one is that you do sell or gift the ranch to Paris and her husband, but from the looks of it, you don't want to do that. Absolutely not, I said firmly. Paris doesn't value the ranch, and Winthrop, I'm more than sure he'll sell it the first chance he gets. Then the second option is they can try to prove that you're incapacitated and can't manage your property. That would require a medical report, and they're unlikely to succeed here. You're in great shape and perfectly sane. He was silent for a moment, as if hesitant to say the next thing. The third option, he could try to forge documents. If he has samples of your signature and access to the original documents, he could theoretically create a fake purchase agreement. I nodded. That was exactly what I was thinking. So, what do we do? Hamish pondered, drumming his fingers on the table. First, we need to protect the original documents. You said they're kept in a desk in your office? Yes, there are copies there. The originals are in a safety deposit box. Good. But if Winthrop thinks they're originals, we can use that. What if we replace them with slightly altered versions? The documents would look real, but contain legal errors that make them invalid. I found the idea interesting, but not reliable enough. What if he goes to a good lawyer? He'd spot the errors right away. Not necessarily. Hamish smiled. There are nuances that only specialists in land law know. For example, we can change the cadastral number or the boundaries of the plot, indicating non-existent landmarks. For a layman, everything will look plausible. We discussed the details, and I agreed to the plan. But I wanted more than that, not just to prevent fraud, but to teach Winthrop a lesson. Hamish, what if we go further? What if we create a situation where Winthrop believes he's successfully pulled off a scam and then finds himself caught in a trap? Hamish looked at me with interest. Do you have a concrete plan? Just an idea for now. We need someone to play the role of ranch buyer, someone we trust completely. If Winthrop tries to sell the ranch with false documents, that person will become the buyer and transfer the money into an account we can control. Hamish looked worried. Blanche, is this already bordering on, I don't know, provocation? We can't encourage him to commit a crime. We're not pushing anyone to do anything, I objected. We're just creating the conditions in which his true intentions will become apparent. If he's an honest man, nothing will happen. Hamish hesitated, but finally agreed to help. We devised a plan of action. The first step was to set up a shell company to act as the buyer. A week later, Hamish reported that he had registered a company called Havenly Retreat, a company specializing in the development of tourist sites. Officially, its owner was his cousin Phineas Cornwell, whom Hamish trusted completely. The company had an impeccable reputation, a bank account, and everything necessary to run the business. The next step was to prepare forged documents for Winthrop. We created exact copies of the originals, but with some minor changes. The cadastral number was slightly changed. The boundaries of the plot were described using non-existent landmarks, and the date of the purchase and sale agreement, which my husband had signed, was changed. To someone unfamiliar with the history of the ranch, these details seemed inconsequential, but they made the documents legally null and void. We placed these documents in my office, in the very desk drawer to which I was sure Winthrop had already picked up the key. I moved the real documents to a hiding place that only Hamish and I knew about. Then Hamish organized a leak through his assistant. In the legal circles of the city began to talk about the company Havenly Retreat, allegedly interested in acquiring real estate in our area to create a luxury resort. This information would reach Winthrop and spur him into action. At the same time, we were preparing for the possible legal consequences. Hamish filed an application with the court for a preliminary injunction against any dealings with the ranch without my personal presence and notarization. That document was to remain sealed until the need to use it arose. We need to be prepared for the possibility that Winthrop may act through Paris, Hamish warned. She still has the old power of attorney from you. I nodded. I'll revoke it. I'll make a new one for you with limited powers. So we did. The new power of attorney gave Hamish the right to represent me only in clearly defined cases and gave him no authority to dispose of the property. About a month into our operation, I noticed the first signs that Winthrop had taken the bait. Paris called and mentioned casually that she and her husband had heard about a company planning to develop tourism in our neighborhood. Can you believe it, Mom? They're offering huge sums of money for the land. Our ranch could be worth a fortune. Winthrop says it's a good time to sell while prices are high. I pretended not to be particularly interested. Honey, I'm not going to sell the ranch. It's our home, our heritage. Money comes and goes, but the land stays. Paris sighed with obvious irritation. Mom, you're so stubborn. Winthrop just wants to help. He says he could handle the negotiations, save you the trouble. Thank you, sweetheart, but I can do it on my own, I replied firmly. After that conversation, there was a lull. I hadn't heard from Paris or Winthrop in almost 2 weeks. I started to worry that our plan wasn't working, but Hamish reassured me. They're getting ready. Winthrop is probably consulting with lawyers, reviewing documents, probably looking for a way to access the originals at the bank. He turned out to be right. In mid-October, I received a call from the bank informing me that a certain man was trying to gain access to my safe deposit box by presenting a power of attorney on my behalf. Fortunately, the bank turned him down because the power of attorney was not notarized and contacted me to confirm. I immediately called Hamish. He's making his move. We need to be ready. We expedited preparations. Hamish contacted Phineas, and he prepared the necessary paperwork to buy the ranch. We opened a special account into which the money from the sham deal was to be deposited. This account was registered to a trust fund controlled by me, but not formally associated with my name. In late October, Paris called out of the blue to say that she and Winthrop were coming up for the weekend. We have something important to discuss, Mom, she said with tension in her voice. I realized that the decisive moment was near. I met with Hamish in his office that afternoon to finalize our arrangements. If I'm right, they'll try to convince me to sign documents to sell or transfer the ranch, I said. When I refuse, Winthrop will likely decide to proceed through forgery. Hamish nodded. We're ready for that. Havenly Retreat has already formally expressed interest in buying the ranch. If Winthrop tries to sell it through forged documents, Phineas will be the buyer. And how do we know Winthrop has taken concrete steps? I have connections at the registry office. They'll let us know if there's a request for information about the ranch or if a preliminary contract is registered. We discussed a few more details and parted, convinced that we had envisioned every possible scenario. Paris and Winthrop arrived Friday evening as promised. Winthrop was unusually attentive during dinner and even tried to help me with the dishes, something unprecedented for him. Paris looked nervous, avoiding my gaze. I waited for them to move on to the purpose of their visit, but the conversation about the ranch never took place that evening. The next morning, I purposely left them alone in the house, telling them I had to go into town to do some shopping. Instead, I met Hamish at a roadside cafe. He looked worried. Blanche, there's news. Phineas received an anonymous call offering to sell the ranch. The caller identified himself as a middleman and said the owner is an elderly woman who wants to sell the property quickly and quietly. Winthrop, I stated. Most likely. The caller quoted a price of $3,700,000 and said the deal had to be done in the next few days or the owner might change her mind. And what did Phineas say? He expressed interest, but said that before the deal could be finalized, the company's experts had to inspect the property and check the documents. The mediator assured me that wasn't a problem. and promised to call back with details. I wondered. Winthrop had acted faster than I'd anticipated. Hamish, I think he's already copied the documents from my office. Probably even prepared the forgeries? Probably. We need to be prepared for him to try to register the deal in the next few days. We agreed that Hamish would check the registration office every day, and Phineas would continue to negotiate with the middleman, delaying the process so we would have time to prepare. When I got home, Winthrop and Paris were sitting in the living room, chatting casually. Seeing me, Winthrop stood up. Blanche, we were beginning to worry. You've taken so long. I smiled. Met an old acquaintance in town. Got chatting. How are you here without me? Fine, he answered too hastily. Paris was showing me old photo albums. It's amazing what a rich history your family has. I noticed that my office, which I usually locked, was open, so they had been there after all. Well, everything was going according to plan. That evening, Winthrop finally got down to business. He began at a distance, talking about how hard it must be for me to manage such a large farm at my age. Then he talked about lucrative investment opportunities and how it was a great time to sell real estate. Imagine, Blanche, he said as he paced around the living room, you could move into a cozy apartment in town without all this worry about the ranch. You'd have more than enough money to live comfortably. I pretended to listen with interest, though I was actually counting the minutes until they left, and I could check out exactly what they were looking for in my office. When I politely but firmly refused to discuss the sale of the ranch, Winthrop looked disappointed but not surprised. He seemed to have expected this reaction and already had a backup plan in place. The next morning, they suddenly announced that they needed to return to town immediately because of Winthrop's important business meeting. I didn't bother to hold them back. As soon as their car disappeared around the corner, I took a thorough look around the office. The papers in the desk drawer looked untouched, but I noticed subtle signs that someone had been looking through them. Everything was folded a little differently. Some papers were slightly displaced. Most importantly, I found a tiny ink stain on one of the sheets that hadn't been there before. Winthrop must have been taking notes or copying information and accidentally left a mark. I immediately contacted Hamish and reported my findings. He advised me to stay alert and prepare for Winthrop's next move. It wasn't a long wait. 3 days later, Hamish called with the news. The preliminary contract for the sale of the ranch to Havenly Retreat had been registered at the registry office. The contract was signed with my name, but of course I hadn't signed anything. He used your signature from other documents, Hamish explained. The forgery is of pretty high quality, but an expert would spot a fake right away. So what now? Now we wait. If I'm right, the next step is to register the final sales contract. Winthrop will probably use a notary in another county where no one knows him. We decided not to take active action, but to continue to monitor the situation. Phineas, meanwhile, continued to negotiate with the middleman, expressing interest in buying the ranch, but constantly finding reasons to delay a final decision. Days went by. I lived in suspense, waiting for the outcome of our complex game. Every ring of the telephone made me shudder. Every arrival of the mailman alarmed me. But Winthrop and Paris seemed to disappear. No calls, no visits. And then, exactly 2 weeks after their last visit, Hamish called with important news. In the neighboring county was registered contract of sale of the ranch. According to the documents, I supposedly appeared in person at the notary's office and signed all the necessary papers. The price of the deal was $3,700,000. He did it, Blanche, Hamish said. Your son-in-law committed forgery and fraud. We have all the evidence. And the money? Already transferred to the account specified in the contract. The account is in the name of some offshore company, but it's controlled by Winthrop. Phineas has made sure the funds can be traced. Everything was ready for the final act of our drama. Now all we had to do was wait for Winthrop to contact me with the news of the sale of the ranch. Nearly 3 weeks had passed since Winthrop's gloating call. I lived in limbo, continuing to attend to ranch business, but constantly waiting for the outcome. Hamish called regularly with updates. Our plan was working perfectly. The money from the sham sale had indeed gone into the account of an offshore company controlled by Winthrop, but thanks to Phineas's foresight, a legal trap had been set. The funds were automatically transferred to a special escrow account and then frozen until the circumstances were clarified. He doesn't know yet that the money is gone, Hamish explained. The account can only be accessed once the standard waiting period for large transactions, 10 business days, has passed. I did the math in my head. So, around today or tomorrow, he'll try to get the money. Most likely, and then he'll get an unpleasant surprise. Indeed, the next day, Hamish called with the news that the bank handling the offshore company's account had received a request to transfer the funds. The request was denied with the explanation that the account had been frozen due to suspected fraud. Winthrop should be furious, Hamish said. He'll probably try to settle the case through his lawyers, but that will take time. In the meantime, I've filed a formal report of fraud and forgery of documents. The police have already started an investigation. I sighed. Despite all my anger at Winthrop, it was hard for me to think that my daughter's husband might be behind bars. Paris, for all her faults, didn't deserve such a disgrace. Hamish, is there any way to resolve this without criminal prosecution? He was quiet for a moment. Technically, if you as the injured party don't press charges, the case could be dismissed. But Winthrop tried to defraud you anyway, Blanche. He deserves to be punished. I'll think about it, I said. For now, let's just wait for their return. It didn't take long to wait. 2 days later, early in the morning, when I was just about to go out to check the horses, a familiar car showed up in the driveway to the ranch. Winthrop at the wheel, Paris beside him. Even from a distance, I could tell they were both on edge, the sudden movements, the tense postures. I met them calmly on the porch. Winthrop jumped out of the car first, his face contorted with rage. "What have you done?" he shouted, running up to me. "What the hell did you do with the money?" Paris got out of the car more slowly, her face pale and drained. She looked confused, like she didn't fully understand what was going on. "Winthrop," I said calmly, "why don't we go into the house first?" The neighbors shouldn't witness a family squabble. He wanted to reply something sharply, but restrained himself by casting his eyes on the road. We entered the house. I led them into the living room, a spacious room with large windows overlooking the ranch fields. This room had always made me feel powerful, strengthening my connection to the land that Ebner and I loved so much. "So," I began as we settled in, "you came back earlier than planned. The cruise didn't go well?" Winthrop clenched his fists. "Stop playing around, Blanche. You know perfectly well why we came back. Where did you put the money from the sale of the ranch?" "From what sale?" I feigned bewilderment. "Don't pretend," he was almost shouting. $3,700,000. The money the Havenly Retreat Company paid for this place. I noticed Paris flinch at the mention of the amount. Apparently, Winthrop hadn't initiated her into all the details of his plan. "Winthrop," I said calmly, "I didn't sell the ranch to anyone. It still belongs to me. Here, take a look." I handed him a fresh extract from the property register that Hamish had prepared for me yesterday. It clearly stated that Blanche Hedgepeth was the owner of the Blue Heather Ranch. Winthrop snatched the paper from my hands, ran his eyes over it, and tossed it on the table. "It's a forgery." I saw the sale papers in person. I got the money in the account. "And where is that money now?" I asked. He fell silent, his face red with rage. "You know perfectly well. The account is frozen supposedly because of suspected fraud. You set that up, didn't you? Paris shifted a perplexed look from her husband to me. Winthrop, what are you talking about? What money? What sale? He turned sharply toward her. Not now, Paris. But she did not back down. No, now. You said we were going to the ranch to discuss the sale offer with Mom. You didn't say anything about the ranch already being sold or that you got any money. There was surprise as well as resentment in her voice. Winthrop clearly hadn't filled her in on all the details of his scam. I decided it was time to reveal the cards. Paris, your husband tried to sell my ranch without my knowledge. He forged my signature on the documents and defrauded the buyer. Fortunately, I saw something like this coming and took action. Paris looked at Winthrop incredulously. Is that true? He waved it away. Your mother twists everything. I acted in our best interests. She's too stubborn to admit she can't manage such a large household. I merely hastened the inevitable. By forging my signature, I clarified, by impersonating my representative before a notary. Winthrop stared at me with hatred. Prove it. You have no proof. I calmly pulled the folder Hamish had handed me the day before from my desk drawer. Here's the signature examination proving forgery. Here's the testimony of the notary's office employee who recognized you from your photograph. Here are documents proving that Havenly Retreat is actually owned by a friend of our family and acted on my request to catch you red-handed. Winthrop turned pale. He was frantically thumbing through papers, his hands trembling slightly. This is illegal. You can't make provocations like this. I didn't provoke anyone to anything, I replied calmly. I merely created the conditions in which your true intentions were revealed. You made your own choice, Winthrop. You chose the path of deceit and fraud. Paris, who had been listening with growing horror, finally intervened. Mom, did you set Winthrop up on purpose? Set a trap for your own son-in-law? She sounded surprised as well as outraged, as if I was the culprit, not her husband. Paris, your husband tried to trick me into foreclosing on my home. I was just defending myself. Winthrop suddenly calmed down. A calculating smile appeared on his face. All right, Blanche, you've won this round, but you're forgetting one important detail. Paris is my wife, and she's the sole heir to this ranch. Sooner or later, it will still be ours. I shook my head. Not necessarily, Winthrop. I'm free to dispose of my property as I wish, and after today, I'll definitely revise my will. Paris jumped up from her seat. Mother, you can't disinherit me just because you disapprove of my husband. I can, dear, and it's not a matter of whether I approve of him or not. The point is that he tried to steal from me, and you seem to be supporting him in this. Paris flushed with anger. I didn't know anything about his plan. But even if I had known, you've always been so controlling, so overbearing. Always knew best how I should live my life, what I should do. I just wanted you to appreciate what you have, Paris, to understand the value of labor and land. The land, she teased. Always only about the ranch. What about me, Mother? Have you ever asked what I want? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. Paris, you're my daughter, and I've always wanted the best for you. But that doesn't mean I should let you and Winthrop cheat on me and rob me of my home. Winthrop, who had been watching our altercation closely, suddenly put his hand on Paris's shoulder. Honey, your mother has made it clear that she doesn't trust us and doesn't want us to be a part of her life. Maybe we should go away and leave her alone with her precious ranch. I could see his game. He was trying to turn Paris against me by exploiting our long-standing differences. And it was working. Paris's eyes filled with tears, but there was resentment as well as determination in them. You're right, Mom. I've never valued this house and this land the way you do, because people are more important to me than possessions, and right now, I'm choosing my husband, even knowing he tried to cheat your mother? I asked quietly. She hesitated for a moment, but then nodded firmly. Even so, Winthrop has always supported me, always been on my side. He gave me something you never gave me, unconditional acceptance. I grinned bitterly. Unconditional acceptance? Winthrop was just manipulating her to get to the money. But Paris saw what she wanted to see. Well, that's your choice, I said. But before you go, I want to make something clear. Winthrop, charges of fraud and forgery of documents have been filed against you. Those are serious offenses for which you can get real jail time. He tensed, but tried to keep his composure. You're bluffing. You won't go all the way. You won't dishonor your own daughter by sending her husband to jail. Don't test me, I replied stiffly. I'm ready to withdraw my statement, but on one condition. You both disappear from my life. No contact, no attempts to contact me or lay claim to the ranch. Never. Paris shuddered. Mom, you can't ask me to choose. I'm not asking you to choose, dear. You've already made your choice. I'm just voicing the consequences. Winthrop put a hand on Paris's shoulder. She's bluffing, darling. She can't just give up her own daughter. I looked him straight in the eye. Test me. Something in my look must have convinced him I was serious. He paled slightly, but quickly pulled himself together. All right, Blanche, we accept your terms. Take your statement, and we'll disappear from your life. Paris looked at him in surprise. Winthrop, you can't just. I can, dear, and so can you. Your mother has made it clear that she chooses the ranch over us. Well, let her enjoy her solitude. I could see different feelings struggling in Paris's eyes: resentment, confusion, anger. But in the end, pride won out, a trait she had undoubtedly inherited from me. Very well, Mother, she said coldly. If that is your wish, we will go. But don't think I shall ever forget or forgive it. I'm not asking for either of those things, I replied. I just want you both out of my life. Winthrop stood up, pulling Paris behind him. We're leaving. But remember, Blanche, you chose this path yourself. They headed for the exit. At the door, Paris turned around one last time. There were tears in her eyes, but her face was determined. Goodbye, Mom. I didn't answer. I just watched them get in the car and drive away, raising a cloud of dust in the driveway. When the car was out of sight, I felt a strange desolation. I had won the battle, saved the ranch, punished Winthrop for his scam, but the price had been high. I'd lost my only daughter. That evening, Hamish called. How'd it go? I briefly recounted the confrontation. Are you sure you want to take the statement back? We have enough evidence for Winthrop to get serious jail time. I'm sure. Let them live their lives and I'll live mine. It's enough that we got the money back and kept the ranch. Hamish was silent. What about Paris? Are you really ready to completely sever your relationship with your daughter? I sighed. I'm not the one who severed that relationship, Hamish. She made her choice, and frankly, I'm not surprised. Paris has always been on the side of whoever gave her what she wanted at the moment. Now it's Winthrop with his promises of a life of luxury. And now what? Now? I looked out the window at the ranch fields lit by the setting sun. Now I get on with my life, running the ranch, taking care of the horses, doing the things I've always loved. But when I hung up the phone, I was overcome with a strange sense of emptiness. Defeating Winthrop should have brought satisfaction, but instead I felt only fatigue. I walked over to the fireplace where there were pictures of the family Ebner, young Paris, all of us together on the ranch. Happy times that could never be brought back. I picked up a picture of Paris on graduation day, smiling, diploma in hand, full of hope for the future. What had gone wrong? When had we lost touch? Maybe I really had been too demanding, too focused on ranching and tradition? No, I shook my head, pushing the doubt away. I was doing what I thought was right. I was teaching my daughter to value labor, the land, the family legacy. If she chose a different path, well, that's her right. But I will not let Winthrop deceive me and take away what Ebner and I have spent a lifetime building. I put the picture back on the mantelpiece and stepped out onto the terrace. The evening breeze rustled through the trees, a horse neighing in the distance. This was my home, my land, and I regretted nothing I had done to protect it. The next day, Hamish confirmed that Winthrop and Paris had left Broomfield. According to his information, they were headed for the East Coast, where Winthrop supposedly had some business prospects. Without the money from the sale of the ranch, their financial situation must have been critical, but that was no longer my problem. I withdrew the fraud claim as promised. Hamish arranged for the money from the escrow account to be returned to my personal account. It could be useful for the development of the ranch. Life was slowly getting back to normal, but I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The loss of my daughter left a void that nothing could fill. Sometimes, on particularly quiet evenings, I wondered how Paris's life with Winthrop would turn out. Would she finally see his true colors? Will she realize that she was just a means of access to money? Or would they somehow miraculously find common ground and build a normal relationship? I didn't know the answers to these questions, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know them. What's done is done. I had protected what I loved at a high price. Now I had to learn to live with the consequences of my choices. Alone, in a big house that held the memory of our family's best days. With Paris and Winthrop gone, it was as if Blue Heather Ranch had lost a part of its soul. I continued to do the daily chores of feeding the horses, checking fences, hiring seasonal workers for haying. But all of these activities became mechanical, devoid of the joy I had always felt when I worked the land. Every corner of the house reminded me of the past. Paris's childhood photos on the walls, her old room with the faded posters she never took down, even when she left for school. Ebner's chair by the fireplace, where he liked to read in the evenings. It all became a museum of memories that only added to the feeling of emptiness. One morning, about a month after the final confrontation, I was standing on the terrace with a cup of tea, looking out at the rising sun coloring the fields golden. Suddenly, a thought struck me. I had protected the ranch, but for whom? For what had I clung to this land, to these walls? Ebner was gone. Paris had turned her back on me. Who would have it all when I was gone? In that moment, I realized that my battle for the ranch wasn't so much about preserving my legacy as it was about standing up to Winthrop, about not wanting to let him win. But now that the battle had been won, I found that I didn't know what to do with that victory. I called Hamish and asked him to come over. He showed up an hour later, concerned at my tone. "What's wrong, Blanche? Are you okay?" I nodded, sitting him down in the living room. "Yeah, I've just been thinking a lot lately. Hamish, I want to sell the ranch." He looked at me in surprise. "Sell it? After all we've been through to keep it?" "That's exactly why. We fought for principle, for justice. But now it's just land and a house. Too big a house for a single woman." Hamish rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Are you sure? This decision isn't about Paris? Maybe in time." I shook my head. "No, it's not about her. Or not just her. It's just that I realized I was holding on to the ranch partly out of stubbornness, partly out of loyalty to Ebner's memory. But Ebner always said land isn't just property, it's a responsibility. And now I feel I can no longer carry that responsibility with the same enthusiasm." Hamish looked at me carefully. And what do you plan to do? Where are you going to go? I smiled, feeling oddly relieved at the decision I'd made. I don't know, maybe to Oregon. I've always wanted to see the forests there. Or New Mexico. They say the sunsets there are amazing. The main thing is to start over, in a place with no memories. Hamish nodded, accepting my decision. Well, if you're sure, I'll help with the sale. We'll try to get a good price. We spent the next few weeks getting the ranch ready to sell. I went through my belongings, deciding what to take with me and what to keep. It was a painful but also a cleansing process. Each item I set aside for a future home symbolized a new step, a new beginning. Hamish found several potential buyers. One in particular caught my eye, the Ellington family from a neighboring state. They raised horses and were looking for a place to expand their farm. When they came to tour the ranch, I immediately sensed their genuine love for the land and animals. Jeremiah Ellington, the head of the family, talked to me at length about horses, farming methods, and future plans. His wife Laurel looked around the house with interest, admiring the antique furniture and architectural details. Their children, two teenage boys and a girl about 10 years old, ran around the fields, clearly excited about the possibilities. We'd like to keep the name Blue Heather if you don't mind, Jeremiah said. It's a beautiful name with a history. I was touched by this suggestion. Of course I'd be delighted. My husband Ebner came up with the name. He used to say that the hills behind the house in the springtime resemble the waves of a blue sea. We agreed on a price $4,200,000, more than Winthrop was offering his supposed buyers. The deal was to close in a month, giving me time to find a new place to live. I decided not to tell Paris about the sale. If she found out, let her find out from someone else. Our paths had diverged, and I didn't want to give her any reason to think I was somehow looking for reconciliation. A week before the deal closed, Hamish brought some unexpected news. Blanche, I got a strange call from a lawyer in Boston. He's representing Paris and Winthrop. They're in a difficult financial situation and are asking for help. I felt my jaw muscles tense. What kind of help? A low-interest loan. Apparently, Winthrop lost his job and Paris is pregnant. They have no money to pay the rent. The news of her daughter's pregnancy hit unexpectedly hard. I'm going to be a grandmother, but I'm never going to see this baby. Another branch of the Hedgepeth family that will grow up with no connection to the past, to the land, to tradition. What did you say? Said I'd pass the information on to you, but I shouldn't expect a positive response, given the circumstances of your last interaction. I nodded. Thank you, Hamish. Tell him I'm not interested in financially supporting people who tried to cheat me. The terms of our parting were clear: no contact. He didn't argue, though I could see a hint of disappointment in his eyes. Hamish had always been an advocate of reconciliation, but in this case I saw no reason for it. Paris had made her choice. Now she would have to live with the consequences. A month later, the ranch sale was closed. I stood in Hamish's office signing the final papers and felt a strange mixture of sadness and release. 38 years of my life were behind me, but something new and uncharted lay ahead. The Ellington family was due to move in the next day. I spent the last night in an empty house, in a bedroom with minimal furniture, a bed, a nightstand, a lamp. Everything else had already been packed up and shipped to my new home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, a small but cozy cottage on the outskirts of town, overlooking the mountains. In the morning, I walked around the ranch one last time, pet the horses the Ellingtons had agreed to keep, looked at the fields, the trees that Ebner and I had planted in our first year here, said goodbye to every corner, every memory. When the Ellingtons' car pulled up, I was already standing on the porch with my suitcase. Jeremiah got out first, followed by the rest of the family. "Good morning, Blanche," he greeted me. "Everything okay?" I nodded. "Everything is fine. The house is yours as agreed. Laurel walked over to me and gave me an unexpected hug. Thank you for trusting us with your ranch. We'll take good care of it. I was touched by the gesture. I know, that's why I chose you. The Ellingtons' young daughter, Lily, ran up to me with a bouquet of wildflowers. These are for you, Mrs. Hedgepeth, so you won't forget our home. I mean your former home. I crouched down to be level with her and accepted the bouquet. Thank you, Lily. I'll never forget this place. And you know what? This is your home now, and I'm glad such a beautiful family will live here. The final goodbyes were short. I got into the cab that was to take me to the airport, and without looking back, I left Blue Heather Ranch, the place that had been the center of my universe for so long. The flight to Santa Fe went smoothly. I looked out the window at the fields, towns, and mountains below, and thought about how strange life is. You never know where the next turn will take you. My new home greeted me with silence and the smell of fresh paint. The real estate agent, a young woman named Carol, was waiting for me with keys and a folder of papers. Welcome to Santa Fe, Mrs. Hedgepeth. Everything is ready as you requested. The furniture has been delivered and arranged according to your instructions. I thanked her and walked into the house. It was much smaller than the farmhouse on the ranch, but bright and cozy. The large windows overlooked the mountains, and the small patio was the perfect place for morning tea. Nothing here reminded him of the past. New furniture, new colors, new views. I spent my first weeks in Santa Fe, setting up house and familiarizing myself with the city. It was a strange time, a time of discovery and loneliness. For the first time in years, I didn't have to get up at the crack of dawn to check the horses or fix the fence. I didn't have to worry about drought or flood, feed prices or vet bills. Gradually, I began to find new interests. Signed up for a ceramics class at the local community center. I volunteered at the library, where I did morning readings for children. I joined a gardening club, although my background was more in agriculture than ornamental plants. It was at the garden club that I met Eleanor Prescott, an energetic widow about my age, with short gray hair and a ringing laugh. She was a local landmark. Her garden regularly won prizes in city competitions, and her advice on growing roses was valued for its weight in gold. "You're the new girl," she announced, sitting down next to me after the first club meeting. "Eleanor Prescott. And let's go straight to you, because I can't stand officialdom." We became fast friends. Eleanor introduced me to other club members, showed me the best places in town, and brought me up to speed on local gossip and traditions. Thanks to her, I gradually became part of the Santa Fe community, not just a new face, but someone with a name, a history, a place. 6 months after moving in, I received a letter from Hamish. He wrote that things were going well on the ranch. The Ellingtons were really taking care of the land and the animals. He also mentioned that Paris had given birth to a son, named Nolan. I sat with the letter in my hands for a long time, imagining the little boy I would never see, my grandson. That night I cried for the first time in a long time. Eleanor, noticing my mood the next day, didn't question me. Instead, she simply invited me to dinner, where she introduced me to Gregory Folsom, a gray-haired retired history professor who turned out to be an interesting conversationalist and, as it turned out later, a good dancer. Life in Santa Fe was slowly finding its rhythm. I no longer felt like a visitor or a tourist. This was my home, my city, my new life. Sometimes I'd get news from Hamish, short notes about what was going on in Broomfield, how the Ellingtons were doing. He never mentioned Paris or Winthrop again, respecting my desire to cut all ties. One day, about a year after the move, I was sitting on the veranda of my house, enjoying the sunset. Eleanor stopped by for a cup of tea, which usually meant at least 2 hours of conversation. "You know," she said, looking at the mountains painted in red-orange hues. "When Harold died, I thought my life was over. 42 years together, and suddenly, emptiness. I didn't know how to go on, what to do with all this time that was suddenly mine alone. I nodded. Though our situations were different, the feeling of loss was familiar. And what helped? Eleanor smiled. Time, new friends, new interests, the realization that life goes on, even when it seems like it's over. And you know what I've realized? The past is always with us, in memories, in habits, in who we've become. But that doesn't mean we have to live in it. Her words echoed in me. Indeed, the past was always with me, Ebner, the ranch, even Paris. But now I was building a new life, a new version of myself. In that moment, I realized I had finally found peace, not just acceptance of loss, but true acceptance of a new path. I was no longer Blanche Hedgepeth of the Blue Heather Ranch. Now I was just Blanche, a woman who loves pottery and gardening, reading to the children at the library, and occasionally dancing with the history professor. Later that evening, after Eleanor left, I pulled out an old photo album, the only thing from the past that I looked through regularly, leafing through the pages with images of Ebner, Little Paris, the ranch in different seasons. I didn't feel the usual heaviness on my heart. Instead, there was a quiet acceptance. It was there, it's a part of me, but it doesn't define me entirely. I closed the album and walked to the window. It was already dark outside, but the mountains were still dark silhouettes against the starry sky. A very different landscape than the plains of Broomfield. A different life. Before I went to bed, I wrote a short letter to Hamish. I didn't ask about Paris or Winthrop or my grandson. Just told him about my new life, about my friends, about finally finding a place where I felt at home. Sometimes you have to lose something precious to find something priceless, I wrote at the end. Thank you for helping me through all of this. You are a true friend. The next morning, I woke up with the sunrise, an old habit I've never been able to get rid of. I made tea and stepped out onto the porch. The air was fresh and clean, and the mountains loomed clearly against the lightening sky. In that moment, I felt a deep gratitude for everything that had happened, both good and bad, for Ebner and the years at the ranch, to Paris, even if our paths had diverged, to Winthrop, whose betrayal paradoxically led me to a new freedom, to Eleanor and Gregory and other new friends, to this house, these mountains, this sunrise. I took a sip of tea and smiled. There was a new day ahead, new opportunities, new stories, and I was ready for them, a calm, confident woman who had finally found her place in the world.